In a world where domestic terrorism threatens to tear America apart, a hardened military officer, a relentless intelligence agent, and an unbreakable field commander face the deadliest insurgency the nation has ever seen. Led by a former Marine turned extremist, the rebellion isn't just about destruction, it's about erasing history itself. As monuments fall and the country teeters on the edge of chaos, the team races against time to dismantle a movement funded by unseen forces. Each battle brings them closer to their enemy, but also reveals a deeper conspiracy, one that stretches beyond American borders. The final confrontation at the Statue of Liberty delivers a crushing blow to the insurgency, but even in victory, the war is not over. A new threat emerges, and as the dust settles, one chilling truth remains. You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. The night air in Washington, D.C. carried an eerie stillness, the kind that felt unnatural in a city known for its history and the weight of its legacy. The Lincoln Memorial stood under the glow of dimmed lights, its towering form a silent testament to the ideals of unity and perseverance. The marble reflected the muted shine of the Capitol's nightscape, a beacon of resilience for a nation that had endured wars, struggles, and triumphs. But on this night, something sinister lurked in the darkness, something that sought to defile the very essence of what this monument represented. A deep, guttural rumble echoed down Constitution Avenue, an approaching storm, not of nature but of men. The Iron Reapers, a ruthless outlaw biker gang, came in a staggered formation, their blackened motorcycles roaring as if to announce their intentions before the first crime had even begun. They were shadows against the pavement, specters of rebellion, against the very nation that had given them their freedoms. They didn't see themselves as criminals, they saw themselves as revolutionaries. At the head of the pack, a beast of a man known as Crusher led the charge. The sheer bulk of him, his cut-off leather vest stretched tight over his barrel chest, made him a formidable figure even before he spoke. His beard, coarse and unkempt, dripped with the sweat of the summer heat, but his eyes burned colder than the stone they had come to deface, a silent challenge to history itself. As they rolled onto the wide steps of the Lincoln Memorial, their tires screeched, leaving skid marks over sacred ground. The gang dismounted in unison, the clink of boots on marble punctuating the desecration they were about to commit. Some of them laughed, others merely smirked, their arrogance as thick in the air as the stench of gasoline that followed them. "Time to rewrite history," Crusher muttered, his deep voice carrying a weight of cruelty. He hefted a sledgehammer from his bike, testing its balance in his grip. His men followed suit, spray cans, chains, and bats appearing in their hands like weapons of war. The first spray of black paint stained Lincoln's feet, anarchist symbols, anti-American slurs, messages of defiance and destruction. They worked quickly, efficiently, like artists in the throes of manic inspiration. The vibrant reds and blacks clashed against the pristine marble, a direct insult to the very ideals etched into the heart of the monument. "Film this," one of them barked, and a younger member fresh to the gang hesitated before pulling out a phone. The blinking red light of the camera began to document the moment, an act of rebellion they intended to spread like wildfire. They would show the world that no symbol, no figure, no piece of American history was untouchable. Crusher took a step back, admiring their work, before hoisting the sledgehammer over his head. "Let's make sure Honest Abe never stands tall again." The impact was deafening. The stone cracked where the hammer met its surface, and the men erupted in cheers. Again and again Crusher brought the hammer down, chipping away at the legacy of the nation. The others followed, their fists, their boots, their weapons colliding with history itself. But what they didn't know was that they weren't alone. 100 yards away, concealed in the dense brush of the National Mall, a different kind of storm was brewing. His eyes drifted toward the honor roll, a massive display with the names of the fallen etched into the marble panels lining the memorial grounds. Names he knew, names he would never forget. He swallowed hard, stepping forward. He let his fingers brush over the cool stone, tracing the carved letters of Sergeant Kyle Briggs, not his friend Briggs, but his brother. Briggs had been in the convoy ambush, had taken a bullet meant for someone else, had bled out before the medics could reach him. Carter had promised to bring him home, but all he had brought back was his name on a wall. Briggs, the one standing beside him now, noticed. First time seeing it in person? Carter nodded once. Briggs sighed. I remember him. Good guy, better than me. Carter's voice was quiet. You don't need to do that. Briggs forced a smile. Do what? Carry guilt for a war that never let any of us go. Briggs exhaled sharply, looking away. You think we'll ever be done fighting? Carter looked at the names on the wall. No. Silence stretched between them, then Brooks' radio crackled again. Security detail, heads up, unidentified vehicle approaching perimeter. Carter's hand immediately went to his sidearm. Briggs stiffened. You've got to be kidding me. The voice on the radio came again, faster this time. Vehicle slowing down, 2 passengers, no weapons detected, but then another voice, a different channel, encrypted. Carter recognized it. Instantly, Markov. You didn't think it was over, did you, Captain? Carter's blood ran cold. Briggs cursed. What the hell? Markov's voice was calm, amused. You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea. Viper's legacy is still alive. Carter's grip tightened around his gun. The world around him blurred. The speeches, the applause, the tribute. It all faded into the background because he knew the truth. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Carter didn't hesitate. He turned away from the honor roll, his mind snapping into focus. Lock it down, he ordered. Now. Brooks was already moving, her radio pressed to her ear. All units, full perimeter security. No one leaves, no one enters until we confirm the threat. Briggs checked his weapon. If Markov's here, we end this. The approaching vehicle slowed just beyond the barricade, black-tinted windows reflecting the early morning sun. Secret Service agents surrounded it instantly, weapons drawn, commands sharp and direct. Then the back door opened. A man stepped out. Not Markov. A courier, unarmed, carrying only a small black case. He raised his hands in surrender. Message for Captain Carter, he called. Carter's teeth clenched. Markov was taunting him. Again. The courier was frisked, the case scanned for explosives, then handed over. No threats detected, but Carter already knew the real weapon was inside. He opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, a printed manifesto. Viper may be dead, but the fire he started will never go out. The war isn't over, Captain. It's only just beginning. No signature, no demands, just a promise. Carter folded the paper, exhaled slowly. Markov was still playing the long game. Briggs eyed him. So what now? Carter looked up, scanning the silent crowd, the American flags swaying in the breeze, the city that had survived because they had fought for it. He pocketed the letter. We stay ready. Brooks met his gaze, understanding the unspoken truth. Their fight wasn't over. It never would be. Carter turned back toward the memorial, the names of the fallen carved in stone. He reached out, brushing his fingers over them one last time. Then he walked away, because there was still work to do. But Carter knew that all the policies and programs in the world wouldn't stop the next war. The only way to truly stop it was to rebuild trust, and that would take more than bullets. 2 weeks later, Carter stood at the Lincoln Memorial, now fully restored. The paint had been scrubbed away, the cracks repaired, but the scars would always be there. Tourists walked the steps again, families took photos, veterans stood quietly, reflecting. Carter watched them. This was why he fought. Briggs approached, handing him a coffee. You sticking around for the ceremony? Carter shook his head. No speeches for me. Brooks joined them, scrolling through her phone. "They're calling this the Second Battle for America," Briggs snorted. "Great, so now we're history." Carter didn't laugh. He just watched as a little girl ran up the steps, pointing at Lincoln's statue, her father lifting her onto his shoulders. This was what they had fought for, but he knew one thing for sure. This war would never truly be over, and when the next battle came, he would be ready. The morning sun bathed Washington, D.C. in a golden hue, casting long shadows across the National Mall. The air was thick with a mix of tension and relief. The war was over. The rebellion had collapsed. But the scars it left behind ran deep, carved into the heart of the nation. Carter adjusted his tie, something he hadn't worn in years. He hated formal ceremonies, hated being paraded around like a hero when all he could think about were the men who didn't make it back. But today wasn't about him. It was about them, the ones who had fought and bled for a country that had nearly torn itself apart. Brooks stood beside him, dressed in a dark blazer, her expression unreadable as she scrolled through security updates on her phone. "Crowds bigger than expected," she murmured. "People actually showed up." Carter followed her gaze. Thousands of people had gathered at the Lincoln Memorial for the nation's tribute to the fallen. Some carried American flags, others held signs thanking the military, the police, the first responders. But there were still some who protested. There always would be. Briggs adjusted his dress blues, standing on Carter's other side. "Never thought I'd see the day people actually thanked us instead of throwing rocks." Carter smirked. "Give it a week." Briggs chuckled, but there was something in his eyes, something tired. They had won the war, but they all knew it wasn't truly over. The next fight would come. The next enemy would rise. It always did. A voice crackled over Brooks's radio. "All clear. No threats detected." Carter exhaled, glancing toward the stage at the base of the memorial. The president was stepping up to the podium, his face solemn, his hands gripping the wooden edges as he surveyed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president began, his voice steady, "we gather here today not just to mourn, but to remember, to honor those who stood in defense of our nation when the very fabric of our history was threatened." The crowd was silent, listening. "They tried to break us," the president continued. "They tried to tear down our monuments, to erase our past, to convince us that our country was weak, divided, beyond saving." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. But they were wrong. Applause rippled through the audience, a low murmur of agreement. The men and women who stood against this rebellion did not fight for themselves, the president said. They fought for all of us, for the promise that America is more than just its history, it is its people. And as long as we stand together, no enemy, foreign or domestic, will ever take that away from us. Carter clenched his jaw. He wasn't sure he believed that. Brooks noticed. "You're thinking something," Carter exhaled. "I'm thinking we got lucky." Briggs crossed his arms. "Lucky?" Carter nodded slightly. "Viper was smart. Markov was smarter. If we hadn't caught them in time, if one piece of this had gone differently." He trailed off. Brooks finished his thought. "We'd be standing in a very different Washington right now." Briggs exhaled. "Yeah, but we stopped them. That has to count for something." Carter glanced at the crowd, the flags, the silent reverence of the veterans standing in the front row, the families of those who had been lost. Maybe it did count. For something. Maybe. The president's speech continued, but Carter tuned it out. This war had stolen months from him. Good men had died. The country was still reeling from the damage, but it was over. For now. Brooks spoke softly. "What happens now?" Carter inhaled slowly, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. "Now," he exhaled, "we make sure nothing like this ever happens again." He turned away from the battlefield, walking toward the waiting transport. Briggs watched him go, shaking his head with a smirk. "Yeah, sure, like he's ever gonna stop." Brooks smiled slightly. "Some men aren't meant to." And as Carter climbed into the vehicle, the war finally behind him, he knew the truth. As long as men like Viper existed, as long as there were people trying to burn history to the ground, he would always be there, to stop them. The flight back to Washington was silent. Carter sat near the window, staring at the endless sky, the horizon stretching out like an empty promise. The war was over. The Iron Reapers were gone, their leadership dismantled, their ranks broken. But the scars they left behind wouldn't heal overnight. Across from him, Briggs leaned back in his seat, exhaustion evident in his posture. So what now? Carter didn't look away from the window. Now, we clean up the mess. Briggs let out a dry chuckle. Hell of a mess. Brooks was typing furiously on her tablet, tracking the political and social fallout of the rebellion. Public sentiment is still divided, she muttered. Some people see us as heroes. Others think we overreached. There are already conspiracy. Theories that the government staged the whole thing to expand surveillance laws, Carter sighed. It didn't matter how many battles they won. There would always be another war, another enemy, another lie waiting to spread like wildfire. Briggs rubbed his face. They actually think we staged this? After everything? Brooks didn't look up. Viper was smart. He didn't just attack monuments, he attacked the idea of America. And even though he's dead, the seeds he planted are still growing. Carter clenched his fists. Viper had lost, but in a way, he had still won. He had made people question everything. The plane touched down at a private military airfield outside Washington. The second they stepped off, a convoy of black SUVs was waiting. A handful of government officials stood nearby, their expressions unreadable. A man in a dark suit approached, Secretary of Defense Mark Hadley. His handshake was firm, his gaze calculating. "Captain Carter," he said, "you and your team did this country a great service." Carter remained stone-faced. "We did our job." Hadley nodded, then gestured toward the vehicles. "The President wants a full debrief. We need to control the narrative before this spirals out of control." Carter exchanged a glance with Brooks and Briggs. They knew what that meant. The government was about to turn this victory into a political play. Still, they had no choice. They climbed into the vehicles, the convoy speeding toward the Pentagon. The conference room was packed. Generals, intelligence directors, political strategists, all of them waiting for Carter and his team to explain what had happened. A massive screen displayed footage from the war zone, Mount Rushmore in flames, the Arlington massacre, the final battle at the Statue of Liberty. The cost of the rebellion was laid out in cold numbers. Lives lost, damage done, the billions it would take to rebuild. Hadley stood at the head of the table. "We need to ensure this never happens again." Carter sat forward, his voice calm, but firm. "That means paying attention before the next threat grows." Viper didn't just appear out of nowhere. He built his army in plain sight and no one stopped him. One of the senators scoffed. "And what do you suggest? More surveillance? More restrictions?" Carter's gaze was sharp. "No, I suggest we stop ignoring the warning signs." Silence. Brooks adjusted her earpiece. "The extremists Viper radicalized aren't gone. They're regrouping online. We cut off the head, but the ideology is still spreading." Hadley exhaled. "So what do we do?" Carter leaned back in his chair. "We don't wait for another Viper to rise. We start building something stronger than fear." Briggs smirked. "Sounds like a hell of a challenge." Hadley nodded. "Then I suggest you start immediately." The meeting ended. Decisions were made, new counter-terrorism operations were launched. But there were no attacks, no riots, no war. Briggs entered, tossing a file onto the table. "We rounded up over 200 insurgents last night. We cut the head off, and now the body is dying." Carter exhaled. "Viper's men?" Brooks looked up from her screen. "Scattered. Some are still fighting, others are running. The Iron Reapers are breaking apart. Their leadership is dead, their funding is gone, and their alliances are dissolving." Briggs leaned against the table. "It's over." Carter wasn't convinced. He had seen men crawl out of worse. He had seen insurgencies survive decapitation. But as he scanned the reports, he knew this time was different. Viper's war had been a movement, a carefully orchestrated rebellion. But without him, it was just chaos. and chaos could be controlled. Brooks turned her laptop around. We have a few holdouts still trying to fight. The biggest group is in Pennsylvania. We intercepted messages. They're planning a last stand, Briggs scoffed. Last stand? What, they think this is the Alamo? Carter didn't smile. They're desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous kind. Brooks nodded. We need to take them down before they rebrand, reorganize, and start this all over again. Carter made his decision. We go in fast, hit them hard, and finish this for good. Briggs grabbed his rifle. Been waiting to hear that. The Pennsylvania compound was deep in the mountains, tucked away from prying eyes. The remaining Reapers had turned it into a fortress, reinforced barriers, makeshift watchtowers, armed patrols. They were preparing for a siege. Carter had no intention of giving them one. The convoy moved through the dense woods in the dead of night, headlights off, engines low. Snipers had already taken positions around the perimeter. Drones fed live footage. To the command team, the Reapers were waiting for a fight. Carter would give them one last chance to surrender. Briggs pressed his radio. We're in position. Carter adjusted his rifle. Execute the breach. The first explosion shattered the night. The front gate crumpled inward, sending flames and debris flying. Before the dust had settled, Carter's men moved in, fast and lethal. Gunfire erupted from the compound as the bikers fought back. They weren't just criminals anymore, they were cornered animals, fighting for survival. Carter pushed forward, his boots kicking up dirt, his rifle steady. He dropped the first hostile in his path, then another. A shotgun blast tore into a vehicle beside him, but Briggs took the shooter down before he could fire again. Keep pushing, Carter barked. The compound was collapsing. Reapers were running, some trying to fight, others trying to escape. Carter spotted one of the last high-ranking officers, a man called Mason, sprinting toward a jeep. Carter fired. The bullet shattered the man's knee, sending him crashing into the dirt. He screamed, gripping his leg as Carter approached. Mason looked up, pain in his eyes, but no regret. You don't get it, he spat. This was never about winning. Carter leveled his weapon at him. Then what was it about? Mason grinned, even through the agony. Making people question everything. Carter exhaled. He had heard this before. The same twisted ideology that had fueled Viper, but this time it didn't matter. Your war is over, Carter said, lowering his rifle. He turned to Briggs. Take him in. The rest of the battle was over in minutes. By the time the last gunshot echoed through the mountains, the Iron Reapers no longer existed. The war was finally over. The sun rose over the smouldering remains of the compound, casting long shadows through the trees. Carter stood at the edge of the wreckage, watching the last prisoners being loaded into transport vehicles. Briggs approached, exhaling sharply. That was the last of them. The bikers are finished. Carter didn't respond right away. He let the words settle. He let the silence sink in. Then, finally, he nodded. Good. Brooks walked up holding a tablet. We're getting reports from across the country. Cells are disbanding. Some are surrendering. Some are just vanishing. Carter glanced at the screen. Cities that had been on edge were beginning to breathe again. Briggs clapped a hand on his shoulder. You did it, man. You stopped it before it could turn into a civil war. Carter looked out at the horizon. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. His wounds from the last battle still raw, but none of that mattered. There was no time to rest. Get everyone ready, he said. We're going to Washington. The briefing room inside the Pentagon was packed with military officials, law enforcement leaders, and intelligence officers. Carter and his team stood near the center, eyes scanning the large digital display on the far wall. Confirm enemy numbers, a general commanded. Brooks stepped forward. Best estimates put their force at over 500 operatives. That includes the Iron Reapers, their allied gangs, and radicalized civilians. They've been stockpiling weapons, including military-grade explosives and armor-piercing rounds. A murmur ran through the room. The general's face darkened. That's an army. Carter's voice was steady. Then we stop them like one. He stepped forward, pointing to the map. They'll come in 3 waves. The first will be a diversionary. Assault, small-scale attacks across the city, meant to spread out law enforcement and cause mass panic. He shifted to another section. The second wave will be their main force, hitting key government buildings: Congress, the Pentagon, the National Mall. They'll go for high-value targets and symbolic destruction. The room was silent as he pointed to the final section of the map. The third wave will be suicide squads. They'll target civilians, hospitals, police stations, anything that makes it look like the country is collapsing. The general adjusted his tie, his fingers tapping against the table. We can mobilize the National Guard, local law enforcement, and counter-terrorism units, but if this goes the way you're predicting, there's no way we avoid casualties. Carter knew that. He had accepted it the moment he realized what was coming. We need to cut the head off the snake before the third wave even starts. Briggs folded his arms. And how the hell do we do that? Carter turned to Brooks. Where's their command post? She tapped her screen, bringing up a secure location outside the city. A heavily fortified compound, their war room. If we take out the leadership before the attack begins, Carter said, we can stop this before it escalates. The general nodded slowly. And if you fail? Carter's eyes didn't waver. Then Washington burns. The room was silent. Finally, the general turned toward the officers. Give them everything they need, Carter exhaled. This was it, one final battle, one last chance to stop the rebellion before it destroyed the country. The team deployed under the cover of night. The compound was a fortress, surrounded by reinforced barricades, guards patrolling with heavy weapons. Carter and Briggs moved through the tall grass, weapons ready, their teams advancing in coordinated silence. The plan was simple: get in, eliminate the leadership, cripple the attack before it could begin. Carter pressed his radio. Go! The first explosion rocked the perimeter, sending shouts echoing into the night. His teams surged forward, storming the compound before the enemy could react. Gunfire tore through the darkness. Carter moved fast and lethal, his rifle dropping the first two enemies in his path. Briggs covered his flank, Brooks directing the assault teams with precision. Inside, they found the command center and the men orchestrating the war. Carter didn't hesitate. No arrests, no negotiations, just bullets. The leaders of the rebellion fell where they stood. Briggs reloaded, breathing heavy. It's over. Carter shook his head. Not yet, he pressed his radio. Status on DC. The reply came instantly. No attacks. The enemy forces are scattered. No clear leadership. Carter finally let out a slow breath. They had done it. The rebellion had died before it could be born. Briggs exhaled, a grin spreading across his face. We won. Carter nodded, scanning the bodies around him. For now, because history had taught him one thing: there would always be another war. The morning after the raid on the compound was eerily quiet. Washington, D.C. had not burned. The White House still stood. The rebellion had collapsed before it could strike. But the city was still on edge, waiting for the next explosion, the next wave of violence. Carter stood in the temporary command, a center, watching a dozen screens displaying live feeds from around the country. D.C. was in lockdown, law enforcement on every street, National Guard at every government building. In a blur of motion, he went for the detonator. Carter didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet slammed into Viper's chest, knocking him back against the railing. He gasped, the detonator slipping from his fingers, clattering to the ground. Fall. The first time, Carter saw something in Viper's eyes that hadn't been there before. Defeat. He staggered, blood staining his shirt, his legs buckling beneath him. He gripped the railing for balance, looking past Carter toward the city skyline. You think this ends with me? Viper whispered, his voice weak. You're just putting out one fire while 100 more start. Carter took a slow breath, lowering his rifle. Then I'll put those out too. Viper let out a soft, bitter chuckle. Then his grip slipped and he fell. Carter watched as the man who had burned history, desecrated the country and nearly torn it apart, disappeared into the darkness below. Briggs exhaled. Jesus. Carter closed his eyes for half a second. Then he turned. Let's go! The battle was over. The war had been won, but deep down Carter knew the truth. Men like Viper would always come back, and so would he. The news spread like wildfire. Viper was dead. His body had been recovered from the base of the Statue of Liberty, broken, lifeless. The man who had waged war on the very soul of America was gone, but there was no celebration, no relief, because even as Viper's corpse was taken away in a black body bag, the war he started was still raging. Carter stood at the edge of Liberty Island, the city skyline stretching before him, the weight of it all pressing against his chest. The wind howled, carrying the sounds of sirens from the mainland. He had hoped that this would be the end, that taking out Viper would stop the bleeding, but as he watched the news feeds coming in, as he listened to Brooks feeding him fresh intelligence, he realized the truth. It wasn't over. It was getting worse. Briggs approached, rubbing dried blood from his knuckles. We should be celebrating, right? The bastard's finally in the ground. Carter didn't answer. Briggs exhaled, glancing toward the tablet in Brooks' hands. What do we got? Brooks didn't look up. Her face was pale, her fingers moving across the screen as fast as her mind could process the information pouring. We expected them to scatter, she said, her voice tense, to fall apart without Viper leading them, but we were wrong. Carter's jaw tightened. He already knew what was coming. They're uniting, Brooks continued, all of them. The Iron Reapers, the other outlaw factions, the extremists Viper radicalized online. They don't see his death as a defeat. They see it as a call to arms. Briggs scoffed, shaking his head. Jesus, the guy spends months destroying everything, and now they want to make him a martyr. Carter clenched his fists. That's exactly what he wanted. Brooks nodded. They're planning one final attack, a coordinated assault bigger than anything we've seen before. Briggs frowned. Where? Brooks hesitated. Then she turned the tablet around. The answer was, right in front of them. Carter stared at the satellite images, the chatterlogs, the intercepted messages. His stomach dropped. Mount Rushmore had been a distraction. The Statue of Liberty was a statement. This was the kill shot. The White House, Brooks whispered. Briggs swore under his breath. You've got to be kidding me. Carter exhaled, his thoughts moving faster than his breath. How long do we have? Brooks tapped on the screen. We estimate their forces are mobilizing within the next 12 hours. They're planning on hitting Washington, D.C. in full force, a direct attack on the government itself. Briggs ran a hand through his hair. So what? They're just going to roll into the Capitol guns blazing? They don't need to take the White House, Brooks said. They just need to make it bleed. They want to show the world that America's own people are turning against it. Carter closed his eyes for a brief second. He could already see it, the streets of D.C. in flames, civilians caught in the crossfire, chaos ripping through the heart of the country. And it wouldn't just be an attack, it would be a declaration. They want to overthrow the government, he muttered. Brooks nodded. And if we don't stop them, they might just pull it off. Carter turned toward the transport jet waiting on the runway. His muscles ached. The city lights stretching beneath them, a glittering maze of streets and towers. Carter wasn't looking at them. His eyes were locked on Liberty Island, the last stand in a war that had already cost too much. He adjusted his earpiece. All units, listen up. We let them land, let them think they have control. When they push forward, we cut them off and drive them into the kill zone. No escape, no retreat. This ends tonight. A chorus of acknowledgements crackled back through the comms. The wheels hit the tarmac hard. The second the doors opened, Carter was moving. The team loaded into waiting SUVs, speeding toward the docks. The city blurred past in a rush of headlights and steel. Even this late at night, New York never slept. But most of the people in those cars, on those sidewalks, had no idea that history was about to be written in blood just a few miles offshore. They reached the waterfront in under 10 minutes. The Statue of Liberty loomed in the distance, bathed in golden floodlights against the blackened waves. Briggs surveyed the setup as they stepped onto the secured ferry. All units in position. We've got sharpshooters on the rooftops. Drones. In the air. Coast Guard standing by. Carter stared out toward the monument. And Viper? Brooks checked her tablet. His convoy's already moving. They'll be here in under 30 minutes. Carter felt it in his bones, the weight of the final confrontation pressing down on him. Every mission had led to this moment. Every loss, every failure. No more running, no more retreating. The ferry rumbled to life beneath them, carrying them. Toward the battlefield, they set up quickly, spreading out across the island. Statue security had been pulled back, deliberately left thin to bait Viper in. NYPD officers blended into the shadows, tactical units hidden behind maintenance sheds and along the edges of the walkways. Briggs crouched near a stack of crates, rifle ready. "We're sure he'll take the bait?" "He won't be able to resist," Carter said. Brooks adjusted her earpiece. "Satellite feed confirms multiple speedboats approaching from the south, estimated 20 men, heavily armed." Briggs smirked. "Guess they don't know they're about to walk into hell." Carter didn't smile. He stared out at the black waters. Waiting, then through the darkness, movement. Speedboats cut through the waves, running without lights. Carter raised his rifle, watching through the scope as figures in tactical gear leapt onto the docks, weapons in hand. "Hold your fire," he murmured into his radio. Viper's men spread out, moving with precision. They thought they owned the battlefield. And then, in the middle of it all, Viper himself. Carter felt something ice-cold settle in his chest as he watched the man step onto the island, his stance relaxed, confident. Too confident, he waited. He let them move deeper, let them think it was all going their way. Then, when Viper gave the order to push forward, Carter struck. "Now!" The first shot rang out, followed by a dozen more. Lights snapped on, flooding the Zee. Island in white brilliance. Snipers fired from the rooftops, the Coast Guard cut off the boats, and NYPD's tactical teams surged from the shadows. Chaos erupted. Carter moved like a phantom through the storm of bullets, taking down the first. Man in his path with 2 quick shots. Briggs followed, covering his flank as Viper's men scrambled, realizing too late that they had been outplayed. Carter barely registered the screams, the gunfire, the rush of bodies. His eyes were on Viper. Viper sprinted toward the statue, weaving through the chaos. He was heading for the pedestal, probably had another detonator tucked away somewhere, one last ace up his sleeve. "Briggs, with me!" Carter barked, breaking into a run. They chased him up the winding staircase, boots pounding against metal, the sound of gunfire echoing below. Viper burst onto the top of the pedestal, the torch of Lady Liberty rising just above him. He turned, breathing hard, his rifle at his side. Carter stopped a few yards away, his own weapon raised. Viper smiled. "This was a nice play, Captain, but it's too late." Carter steadied his aim. "Drop it, it's over." Viper exhaled through his nose, tilting his head. "You actually believe that, don't you?" Briggs emerged from the stairwell behind Carter, rifle locked on target. "End of the line, Viper." Viper's expression didn't change. Then, "But Christ, he's 3 steps ahead." Carter turned to the map on the wall, his mind working through the possibilities. Viper had used Mount Rushmore to fracture the country's morale, to push the public into doubting their own government. But he wasn't done yet. "We need to predict his next move," Carter said. Brooks shook her head. "We don't have enough data. He's been too careful." Carter stepped closer to the screen, staring at the grainy footage of Viper boarding the chopper. "No, he's been predictable. We just haven't been paying attention." Briggs frowned. "What are you thinking?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "He's not just hitting historical sites. He's targeting symbols of power. Lincoln, Rushmore, the Naval Museum. These aren't just monuments. They represent something." Brooks caught on. "So his next target has to fit the pattern." Carter nodded. "Something nationally significant, something people will rally around. If he takes that down, he doesn't just break the government, he breaks faith in it." Briggs rubbed his chin. "The White House? The Capitol?" Carter shook his head. Too obvious, too well protected. He needs something accessible, something that will send shockwaves through the country. Brooks went pale. The Statue of Liberty. Silence. Carter didn't need to say anything. They all knew Viper had targeted Lincoln's legacy, the foundation of American values. He had gone after Mount Rushmore, the faces of leadership and resilience. The Statue of Liberty wasn't just a monument, it was a symbol of everything the country stood for, and if he destroyed it, he wouldn't just be attacking America. He would be attacking hope itself. Briggs clenched his jaw. Then we go to New York. Carter's voice was like steel. Now. The flight to New York was tense, the jet cabin silent except for the occasional hum of comms updates. Carter sat. Across from Brooks, his fingers steepled, his thoughts relentless. The stakes had never been higher. If Viper succeeded, it wouldn't just be a blow to morale. It would be the moment America fell apart. Briggs was scrolling through satellite feeds. Port security is already on alert, but they don't have the firepower to stop a coordinated attack. Carter didn't look up. They won't have to. Brooks glanced at him. You have a plan? Carter's jaw tightened. We don't wait for him to make the first move. We take him by surprise this time. Briggs smirked. I like where this is going. Carter finally looked up. We set a trap of our own. Brooks raised an eyebrow. How? Carter leaned forward, his voice unwavering. Viper thinks we're reacting, that we'll be scrambling to defend the statue, to lock it down. But what if we bait him instead? Briggs nodded slowly. You mean make him think security is thin? Let him walk into an ambush? Carter's eyes were cold. Exactly. Brooks frowned. That's a gamble, Ethan. If we're wrong... Carter cut her off. We're not wrong. He wants a spectacle. We give him one. And then we put him in. The ground... No one argued. This was it. The final act was coming, and this time Viper wouldn't be the one walking away. The cargo bay doors of the transport plane rattled from the turbulence, but Carter barely noticed. His mind was already in New York, moving through the coming battle before it had even begun. This wasn't like Rushmore. This wasn't like Arlington. This time, Viper wasn't escaping. Brooks sat across from him, her fingers tapping against the keyboard of her tablet, running the last-minute checks on their trap. The Statue of Liberty loomed in every intelligence report, satellite image, and internal briefing. It was their final battleground. Briggs checked his rifle for the third time. We're set up with NYPD's tactical units, Coast Guard securing the harbor, but they don't have the manpower to hold off a full assault. If this goes loud, it's going to get real bad, real fast. It won't get that far, Carter muttered. Briggs gave him a skeptical glance. And what if it does? Carter exhaled through his nose, tightening his grip around the edge of his seat. Then we finish it the hard way. The radio crackled in his earpiece. ETA 5 minutes, the pilot called out. Brooks looked up. We just intercepted. Chatter from Viper's men. They're moving in under cover of night, hitting the island from multiple angles. He's bringing everything. Carter's jaw tightened. Then so do we. The plane descended fast. They pushed forward, bullets slicing past them as the enemy tried to break through the steel-reinforced doors. Carter fired in short bursts, dropping 2 men before taking cover behind a stone barricade. Then, through the smoke, he saw him. Viper stood near the entrance, directing his men, his rifle slung over his shoulder like he wasn't even worried. His gaze met Carter's, and for a moment there was no battle, no gunfire, just a silent understanding between 2 men who knew this fight would only end one way. Then Viper smiled and detonated the second charge. The explosion threw Carter back, his ears ringing as he hit the ground. The underground chamber doors buckled, the blast tearing through the foundation of the monument. Dust and debris filled the air. Rushmore was falling. Carter forced himself up, vision blurred. He pressed his radio. Status. Briggs coughed through the comms. We're still up, but the bastards are pushing hard. Carter's chest burned with fury. He wouldn't let this happen. Through the haze, Viper turned away, retreating toward a waiting helicopter. His men were breaking off, scattering into the night like cockroaches. Carter lifted his rifle, aiming for Viper's head. Finger on the trigger. A second too late. The chopper lifted off, disappearing into the night. Carter lowered his weapon, his breath heavy. They had lost Rushmore. The mountain still stood, but the damage was done. The message had been sent. Briggs staggered over, wiping blood from his forehead. This isn't just about history anymore. Carter didn't respond. He already knew this was war, and next time he wouldn't hesitate. The wind howled through the shattered remains of the underground chamber, carrying with it the stench of burning stone and smoke. The once pristine halls beneath Mount Rushmore were now nothing more than twisted steel and collapsing rubble. Carter stood amidst the wreckage, his breathing ragged, his body aching from the blast that had nearly buried him alive. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance as emergency teams scrambled to contain the destruction. Dust still hung thick in the air, coating his throat like ash. His rifle hung limply in his grip, his knuckles bloodied from clawing his way out of the debris. But none of that mattered. They had lost. Briggs stumbled toward him, wiping soot from his face. His uniform was torn, a fresh gash bleeding just above his eyebrow. "We need to regroup," he said, voice hoarse. "There's still time to chase them." Carter didn't move. His eyes were locked on the destruction before him. The Iron Reapers had done more than just damage a monument. They had sent a message, one, that echoed across every television screen, every radio broadcast, every social media feed. America's history was under attack, and its protectors had failed. Brooks's voice crackled through the radio, frantic. "Ethan, are you hearing this?" Carter lifted his radio. "Go!" "They're already spinning this," she said, her words tight with frustration. "There's footage of the explosion all over the internet. The narrative is shifting. They're saying we provoked this, that it's a government cover-up." Carter closed his eyes for a brief second, then turned, scanning the perimeter. Media vans were already arriving outside the secured zone. The public wasn't going to see this for what it was, a domestic terrorist attack. They were going to see exactly what Viper wanted them to see, a nation eating itself alive. Briggs swore under his breath. "So we take a hit, and now we're the bad guys?" Carter's grip tightened around his rifle. This was bigger than tactics now, bigger than just stopping a single man. This was a psychological war, and Viper had just won another round. He turned toward the nearest surviving command post, stepping over fallen debris and shattered rock. His team was exhausted, battered, but they were still standing. That was enough for now. Inside the command tent, Brooks was waiting, her face tight with frustration. "We're running out of time." Carter's voice was steady but cold. "Where's Viper?" Brooks tapped a key on her laptop, pulling up grainy surveillance footage. "The chopper took him to a private airstrip in North Dakota. He's gone underground again. We don't have a lock on his next move, but—" She hesitated. Carter's jaw clenched. "Say it," Brooks sighed. "He's not running. He's regrouping." Briggs exhaled sharply. "We knew he'd pull this. The pain that mattered wasn't physical." Across from him, Brooks was pulling up satellite imagery, her fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. Briggs stood by the window, his jaw tight, arms crossed over his chest. No one had spoken in a while. The only sound was the hum of the equipment and the occasional crackle of the radio. Then Brooks broke the silence. "We just intercepted new intel." Carter lifted his gaze. "Tell me it's not another goddamn trap." She hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. "Mount Rushmore." Carter's grip on the coffee mug tightened. The screen showed an encrypted message pulled from one of the communication channels they had been monitoring. Viper's next target. Briggs let out a slow breath. "This isn't just another act of vandalism, is it?" Brooks shook her head. "No, this is something bigger." Carter leaned in. "How big?" Brooks clicked to another feed. construction. Blueprints for Mount Rushmore, schematics of the underground chamber beneath the monument. They're planning to bring it down. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Briggs pushed off the wall. Jesus Christ. Carter was already moving, grabbing his gear. We need to move, now. Brooks followed. Ethan, this isn't just about a monument. If they pull this off, it's going to fracture the country. The symbolism... I know, Carter cut in. He turned to Briggs. We have assets in South Dakota? Briggs nodded. Local law enforcement and some National Guard units. But if Viper's bringing the kind of firepower we saw in Nevada, we'll need more than a handful of cops with sidearms. Carter clenched his jaw. Then we call. In everything we've got. He pressed his radio. Command, this is Carter. Patch me through to every available unit near Mount Rushmore. This is priority 1. The response came immediately. Copy, Captain. Mobilizing forces now. They had less than 12 hours before Viper made his move. The transport jet touched down at an abandoned airstrip outside Keystone, South Dakota. The wind howled through the open terrain, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant rain. Carter stepped onto the tarmac, his boots crunching against the gravel as he took in the landscape. Mount Rushmore loomed in the distance, a silent titan against the stormy sky. Briggs fell in beside him. We got a perimeter set up, but it won't hold if they hit hard. They will, Carter said. Viper doesn't play games. He wants to erase history. They moved toward the command post set up near the visitor center. Inside, maps covered the tables, red markers outlining key access points, potential weak spots, and possible entry routes for the attack. A local SWAT commander stood near the center, arms folded, his face grim. This doesn't make sense, the commander said. Why Rushmore? It's not like it's a functional government site. It's a symbol, sure, but... That's exactly why, Carter interrupted. It's not just about destruction. It's about sending a message. They want to make people feel like nothing is sacred anymore. Brooks pulled up the latest intelligence. Based on chatter, they've got explosives, drones, and at least 30 operatives. They've also coordinated with local extremist cells. This isn't just the Iron Reapers. It's bigger, Briggs whistled. They're bringing everything. Carter turned to the room. Then so do we. He laid out the plan. They would fortify the access points, cut off the supply routes, and force the enemy into a bottleneck. The moment they made their move, they would be met with overwhelming force. Carter looked around the room. This is where we stop them. No one argued. The first explosion ripped through the base of the monument just before midnight. Carter was already moving before the dust settled, his rifle tight against his shoulder as he sprinted through the smoke. Gunfire lit up the night, tracer rounds cutting through the darkness as his team engaged the enemy. Briggs's voice came through the comms. Multiple hostiles at the north entrance. They're trying to breach the underground chamber. Carter cursed. The chamber beneath Mount Rushmore held decades of classified documents, historical records, artifacts. It wasn't just a monument. It was a vault of history. Viper wasn't just here to destroy stone faces. He wanted to erase the records of the past. Carter turned toward the underground access, signaling to his team. With me, we hold the chamber at all costs. She nodded, adjusting her earpiece. Live, feed. We'll see them before they see us. Carter exhaled. No more surprises. No more ambushes. This time, we take control. They landed under cover of night, miles from the airfield, moving in complete silence. The wind howled through the Wyoming plains, the smell of distant fuel and dust filling the air. Carter adjusted his night vision goggles, scanning the target area. The airstrip was alive with movement, trucks, men, and a private jet parked at the far end of the runway. The shipment was already in motion. If they didn't stop it now, they wouldn't get another chance. Carter spoke through the radio. Briggs, take the perimeter. Brooks, I need an eye on Markov's people. We go in quiet. The team split off, each man moving with surgical precision, rifles up, safeties off. Carter's boots barely made a sound as he crept toward the first target, a lone sentry standing near the fuel tanks. He moved fast, knife to the throat, body, lowered to the ground without a sound. One down. Briggs's voice came through the comms. Perimeter is clear. They don't know we're here. Brooks whispered. I've got something. Viper's not on site, but Markov is. Carter froze. What? Brooks sent a live thermal feed to his goggles. Markov was inside the jet, standing near pallets of weapons, talking to a man in a suit. Carter's blood ran cold. They weren't just delivering weapons, they were negotiating. This is bigger than we thought, Brooks whispered. Carter took a slow breath. Then let's take everything from them. He gave the signal. His team moved. The first explosion erupted from the fuel tanks, sending fire into the sky. The airstrip erupted in chaos, Markov's men shouting, scrambling for weapons. Carter rushed the runway, gunfire ripping through the night. A man emerged from the shadows, raising a rifle. Carter dropped him with 2 shots to the chest. Briggs' voice cut in, gruff, urgent. We got runners! Carter turned toward the jet. Markov's guards were hauling crates toward the aircraft, trying to escape with the shipment. Not today. He sprinted forward, dodging between cargo containers, firing into the chaos. The jet's engines roared to life. If Markov got airborne, they would lose everything. Carter raised his rifle, firing into the cockpit. The pilot slumped forward, the aircraft jerking as the throttle failed. Brooks' voice cracked through the comms. We need to take Markov alive. Carter rushed up the ramp as the guards inside fired back. He hit the first man with a burst to the shoulder, sending him spinning. The second lunged, swinging a knife. Carter caught the arm, twisted, and drove his elbow into the man's skull. Then Markov. The Russian stood at the far end of the jet, calm, a pistol hanging loosely in his grip. Carter didn't hesitate. He leveled his rifle. Hands up now! Markov smirked. Captain Carter, I was expecting you. Carter's finger hovered over the trigger. You're funding this war. You think we'll let you walk away? Markov chuckled. You are looking at this the wrong way. I don't fund wars, Captain. I create them. The words barely had time to sink in before Markov pressed a detonator. The runway exploded. Carter was thrown backward as fire consumed the jet, the force slamming him into the bulkhead. His ears rang, his vision blurred with smoke and heat. Through the haze, he saw Markov staggering toward an emergency hatch. His suit burned but intact. Carter fought to stand, raising his weapon, but it was too late. Markov dropped from the jet, disappearing into the night. Briggs' voice roared through the comms. Carter, get out of there! The fire swallowed the jet, sending metal and glass ripping through the air. Carter barely made it out before the explosion consumed everything. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back, chest heaving, the night sky spinning overhead. Markov was gone. But now Carter knew the truth. This war wasn't just about Viper, it was about something much bigger. The world outside the safe house was quiet, but inside, the tension was suffocating. The Wyoming mission had ended in chaos. Markov was gone, the jet was destroyed, and Viper had slipped through their fingers again. Carter sat in silence, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His shoulder still throbbed from the Nevada ambush, his ribs ached from being thrown against the bulkhead, but he barely noticed. We need air support, now! Brooks's voice came back, tense, urgent. Negative! Enemy jamming our comms! We're blind up here! Carter clenched his jaw. They had no reinforcements, no escape. Viper's voice rang through the chaos. Surrender! Now, Captain, save your men. Walk away from this. Carter's grip tightened on his weapon. Never! Briggs glanced at him. Sir, if we don't move now, we're all dead. Carter exhaled sharply. They had one shot, smoke grenades. Lay cover and push through. Briggs didn't hesitate. He tossed the first grenade, and thick white smoke engulfed the battlefield. Carter moved fast, leading his team through the haze, firing into the dark as they forced their way out. Bullets whizzed past. Briggs went down, but Carter hauled him up, dragging him forward. They could hear the bikers shouting behind them, but they didn't stop. They ran, and then silence. The gunfire faded as they breached the tree line, disappearing into the night. They had escaped, but it wasn't a victory. Carter collapsed behind a rock, chest heaving, blood dripping from a gash in his arm. Briggs sat beside him, coughing. That was bad. Carter stared at the burning town in the distance. It wasn't just bad. It was worse than Arlington. Viper had won. Again. Carter clenched his fists, his knuckles white. This had to end. No more chasing, no more reacting. Next time, Viper wouldn't see them coming. The air inside the safe house was thick with exhaustion, blood, and failure. The team had barely made it out of Nevada alive, and the sting of another lost battle weighed heavy in the room. Carter sat at the edge of a metal table, pressing a blood-stained rag against the gash in his arm, his mind replaying the ambush over and over. They had walked right into it. Again. Briggs sat across from him, a bottle of water in one hand, his other hand clenched into a fist against his knee. His usual humor was gone, replaced by something colder. "We underestimated him," he said finally. Carter exhaled through his nose. "We didn't underestimate him. We just keep thinking we're ahead when we're already behind." Brooks stood near the far wall, her eyes locked on the laptop screen in front of her. The glow of encrypted messages reflected against her face, unreadable and tense. "I've been going through the data we pulled before the ambush," she said. "And I think we've been looking at this the wrong way." Carter lifted his head. "Talk." Brooks turned the screen toward them, showing bank transactions, millions of dollars moving through shadow networks, funneled into offshore accounts, then reappearing in the form of weapons, vehicles, and recruitment money. "This isn't just a rebellion," Brooks said. "This is an investment." Briggs frowned. "By who?" Brooks hesitated. "Multiple sources, but one name keeps coming up, Nikolai Markov." Carter's stomach tightened. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Markov was a Russian oligarch, one of the many who had built an empire on dirty money, oil, and arms deals. But his influence wasn't just financial. He had his hands deep in political warfare, destabilizing governments from the inside out. Briggs swore under his breath. "So, we're not just fighting bikers and radicals. We're fighting foreign money, too." Carter rubbed his face. "That explains the logistics. It explains the resources, the discipline. Viper's not just running some ragtag militia. He's being funded like an insurgency." Brooks tapped a few keys, pulling up another screen. Satellite footage of a private airfield in the middle of nowhere. And it gets worse. Markov's money is paying for something bigger. There's movement at this location. A shipment of weapons, possibly military-grade tech. If Viper gets his hands on this, he won't just be attacking symbolic targets anymore. Carter leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Where?" "Wyoming," Brooks said. "In the next 24 hours. Silence. Then Briggs stood. "Then we go. We end this before it starts." Carter nodded. "Gear up." The team moved fast. The transport jet cut through the night sky, engines humming as Carter and his men prepped their gear. They had one shot at this. If they could cut off the supply line, they wouldn't just be dealing Viper a loss. They'd be crippling his entire operation. Briggs checked his rifle for the third time, his movements precise. "We do this right, and we put this bastard in the ground." Carter looked over at Brooks. "We got satellite eyes." Every time they thought they had him, Viper was already one step ahead. But this time, it wasn't just about cutting off the head of the snake. It was about breaking its spine before it could lash out again. "We're not walking into another ambush," Carter said. "We set the terms this time." Briggs cracked his knuckles. "About damn time." The plan was simple. Infiltrate under cover of night. Take out the sentries. Crush the heart of the operation before Viper could make his next move. The transport touched down outside a remote airstrip, the engines roaring before cutting to silence. The desert stretched in all directions, empty, vast, unforgiving. Carter stepped off the plane and into the cool night air, adjusting his gear. The mission would be quick, precise, surgical. No more firefights in public places, no more letting Viper dictate the fight. They loaded into tactical vehicles, moving in darkness toward the abandoned town. The closer they got, the more Carter's gut twisted. Something felt wrong. Briggs must have sensed it too, because he muttered, "I don't like this." Neither did Carter. But they were too close now. Through the night vision scope, he could see the old mining town in the distance, its rusted structures barely holding together. A few dilapidated buildings, an old saloon, a gas station with its sign hanging by a thread. But the real danger was in the movement, figures patrolling, weapons slung over their shoulders. Targets confirmed, Brooks whispered through the comms. We count at least 20 guards on rotation. Vehicles stationed in the main square. There's activity inside the largest structure. That's where Viper will be. Carter nodded. We move in quiet. No gunfire unless necessary. The team advanced, weaving through the shadows, avoiding the floodlights that flickered over the dry, cracked earth. They took down the first sentries without a sound. Knives sliding between ribs, hands over mouths, bodies dragged into darkness. Carter signaled forward. They were in position. The entrance to the main building loomed ahead. Then his radio crackled. "Too late. Sir, we've got—" The first explosion ripped through the silence. A massive detonation erupted from inside the building, blowing out windows, shattering walls, sending debris flying into the night. The ground shook beneath their feet. Then gunfire. They knew we were coming. The mining town erupted into chaos, bikers emerging from the buildings, weapons blazing. The air filled with the thunder of automatic fire, tracer rounds slicing through the darkness. Carter hit the ground, rolling behind a rusted-out truck as bullets pinged off metal. Briggs dove beside him, cursing. "It's a setup!" "No, not again." Carter gritted his teeth, pressing his radio. "Full retreat, we're compromised." But it was already too late. Figures moved from the buildings, surrounding them on all sides. A sniper round shattered a headlight inches from Carter's position. Briggs fired back, dropping one of the attackers. But for every one they took down, 2 more emerged. "We have to punch through the east side," Brooks shouted through the comms. "That's our only way out." Carter didn't hesitate. "Move, now!" The team pushed toward the eastern edge of the town, laying down suppressive fire as they moved. Carter led the charge, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he fired burst after burst into the night. The enemy fell back, but only slightly, and then the second explosion hit. The force threw Carter off his feet, sending him crashing into the dirt. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He tasted blood. Briggs hauled him up, dragging him back into cover. "Carter, we're cut off. They've got us pinned." Through the haze of dust and fire, Carter saw him. Viper, standing atop the wreckage of the main building, watching. His rifle was slung across his chest, but he wasn't firing, he was waiting. Carter forced himself to his feet. "Viper!" Viper smiled, his expression calm, confident. "You never learn, do you, Captain?" he called out. "You keep walking into my traps, and every time I take something from you." Carter raised his rifle. "Not this time." Viper tilted his head. "You sure about that?" Then he gave the order. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Carter ducked, dragging Briggs down with him as bullets tore through the air. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded. Briggs pressed his radio. "Brooks!" 5 minutes was an eternity in a firefight. A sudden explosion rocked the ground, sending Carter sprawling. His ears rang, his vision swimming as dirt and debris rained down around him. He pushed himself up, coughing through the dust, just in time to see Viper emerge from the smoke. The man walked through the chaos with calm, deliberate steps, a rifle slung over his shoulder, his gloved hands resting lazily on the weapon. His eyes locked onto Carter, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Carter forced himself to his feet, gripping his rifle tighter. "You're a sick bastard, you know that?" he growled. Viper smirked. "You don't get it, Captain. You're still fighting for something that's already dead." He gestured toward the burning graves. "America is rotting, and all I'm doing is speeding up the process." Carter's finger tensed against the trigger. "You really think people are going to follow you after this?" Viper's smirk widened. "They already are." The words hit harder than they should have, because deep down Carter knew it was true. Viper wasn't just leading a gang anymore. He was leading a movement. Before Carter could react, Viper raised his rifle. Carter dove to the side as the first shot rang out, barely missing his head. He rolled behind a fallen statue, returning fire. Viper disappeared into the smoke, moving like a shadow, his laughter echoing through the chaos. Carter pressed his radio. "Briggs, keep the bikers off me. Viper's mine." Briggs's voice crackled back. "Roger that." Carter pushed forward, weaving through the graves, his weapon at the ready. Viper was leading him somewhere, drawing him in. Carter knew it was a trap. He didn't care. The cemetery grew quieter the deeper he moved, the sounds of gunfire fading. Behind him, and then a whisper from the darkness. "You still don't get it, do you?" Carter spun just as Viper stepped from the shadows, his rifle lowered. "This isn't about winning. It's about making them lose faith." Carter raised his weapon. "Not tonight." Viper moved fast, too fast. He ducked low, kicking out Carter's leg, sending him sprawling onto the dirt. His rifle clattered away as Viper pressed a boot to his chest, pinning him down. For the first time, Carter saw it, the absolute conviction in Viper's eyes. "You're too late." Then, from the distance, sirens. Viper's gaze flicked toward the sound, his jaw tightening. He let out a slow breath, then took a step back. "This war doesn't end with me, Carter." He turned and disappeared into the darkness just as Briggs and the others arrived, weapons raised. "Where is he?" Briggs panted. Carter sat up, wiping blood from his mouth. He stared at the empty night, at the burning graves, at the symbolic wound carved into the country. "Gone," he muttered. The bikers who were still alive were rounded up, the fires put out, but the damage had been done. Carter stood amidst the wreckage of the battle, his fists clenched. This wasn't just another attack. This was Viper proving that no place was sacred anymore, and if they didn't stop him soon, nothing would be left to save. The flight to Nevada was silent. The weight of failure sat heavy on Captain Ethan Carter's shoulders, his body still aching from the last battle. Arlington had been a disaster. No matter how many arrests were made, no matter how many fires were put out, the image of Viper standing over those desecrated graves lingered in Carter's mind like a ghost that refused to leave. Viper had gotten away again. But this time, Carter wasn't just chasing him. He was hunting him. Brooks sat across from him, flipping through files on a tablet, her brows drawn together in deep concentration. Sergeant Briggs cleaned his sidearm, his movements methodical, silent. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in Arlington, in Denver, in Texas. Carter exhaled, his fingers tightening into fists. He wouldn't let this bastard slip away again. Finally, Brooks broke the silence. "We have a lead." Carter lifted his gaze. "Talk." She tapped on her screen, pulling up an aerial image. "Intel suggests Viper's meeting with some of his top lieutenants at a desert hideout in Nevada. It's an abandoned mining town, miles from anything. Perfect place to regroup, resupply, and plan their next move." Briggs leaned in, peering at the screen. "You sure he's there?" Brooks hesitated. "As sure as we can be." Carter didn't like it. Carter's blood ran cold. "The cemetery?" "Yeah," Brooks confirmed. "And if he pulls this off, it won't just be a monument this time." Carter closed his eyes for a brief moment. Viper wasn't just tearing down history anymore. He was going after the dead. Carter tightened his grip. Not this time. The night air was thick with humidity as the black SUV tore down the Virginia highway, its tires biting into the pavement as Captain Ethan Carter pressed the accelerator harder. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty stretch ahead, but his mind was already at the destination. Arlington National Cemetery. He barely registered the voices coming through his radio, the intel feeds from Agent Natalie. Brooks spitting out intercepted messages, live drone feeds, and threat assessments. His jaw was tight, his pulse hammering like a war drum against his ribs. Viper was heading for Arlington. He wasn't just attacking a monument this time. He was desecrating the very ground where America's fallen heroes rested. Carter had seen war. He had seen what men were capable of when they believed in nothing but destruction. But this was beyond strategy, beyond ideology. This was a declaration of war against the soul of the country. Briggs sat in the passenger seat, loading a fresh magazine into his rifle. His face was cast in stone, his eyes narrowed, his breathing even. "We have confirmation on numbers." Brooks' voice crackled through the speaker. "Intel estimates at least 40 men, possibly more. They've got explosives, flares, and enough firepower to hold off law enforcement for hours." "Casualties?" Carter asked, his grip tightening on the wheel. A brief pause. Then Brooks spoke, her voice grim. "Initial reports say the night watchmen were taken out first. 2 security officers are already dead." Briggs exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "They didn't even give them a chance." Carter's teeth clenched. No, of course they didn't. That wasn't how Viper operated. He wasn't just sending a message. He was making a spectacle. The cemetery loomed ahead, the wrought iron gates barely visible against the night. Carter didn't slow down. The SUV crashed through the entrance, sending shards of metal and stone flying as the engine roared. The second their tires hit the cemetery's grounds, he saw them. Bikers, anarchists, men in dark tactical gear moving like they had rehearsed this 1,000 times. And then he saw the flames, rows of gravestones burned in the night, the firelight casting long, grotesque shadows across the sacred ground. The smell of burning fabric and scorched earth filled his nostrils as he slammed on the brakes. Briggs was out first, rifle raised, scanning the battlefield. Carter followed, his heart pounding as he took in the scene before him. The bikers weren't just vandalizing the cemetery, they were digging up graves. His stomach twisted as he spotted them, shovels in hand, dragging open caskets into the night. They weren't just defacing history, they were defiling the dead. Rage ignited in Carter's chest. "Weapons free, take them down!" Gunfire erupted as his team moved in, bullets snapping through the night. The bikers scattered, some scrambling for their weapons, others diving for cover behind overturned gravestones. A shotgun blast roared from the darkness, sending a spray of dirt and stone into the air. Carter dropped low, returning fire, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he cut down the first attacker. A second man lunged from the shadows, a hunting knife flashing in the firelight, but Briggs was faster. One shot to the chest, and the man crumpled into the dirt. "Push forward! Secure the perimeter!" Carter moved like a ghost through the battlefield, his breath steady, his focus razor-sharp. Another biker popped up from behind a headstone, aiming a sawed-off shotgun. Carter didn't hesitate. 3 quick rounds and the man was down. But the fight was far from over. From the center of the cemetery, a flare shot into the sky, bathing the battlefield in blood-red light. More bikers surged from the darkness, their war cries tearing through the night as they opened fire. Carter took cover behind a massive stone monument, breathing hard. He pressed his radio. "Brooks, where the hell is our backup?" 5 minutes out, Brooks responded, her voice strained. "Local PD is on their way, but it's just you and your team for now." Carter gritted his teeth, pulling up a live feed of intercepted chatter. "We've been monitoring encrypted forums, tracking their recruitment efforts. Viper isn't just leading the Reapers anymore. He's radicalizing others. Smaller gangs, ex-military looking for a cause, survivalists who think the country is falling apart. He's building something bigger." Briggs leaned forward. "How many are we talking?" Brooks hesitated before answering. "Potentially hundreds, and if the funding keeps coming in, thousands." Silence hung in the air. Carter finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "Where is he?" Brooks exhaled. "Our best lead puts him in northern Montana. Isolated compounds, training facilities. They're using old logging roads to move supplies. If we want to hit them before they consolidate power, we need to move now." Briggs pushed off the table, shaking his head. "This guy was trained by us. He knows every play we'll run before we do. He'll be waiting." Carter nodded. "Then we stop playing by the book." The decision was made. Within hours, the team was in the air, heading north. The transport plane hummed softly as they reviewed the latest intel. The compound was deep in the wilderness, fortified, well defended. A frontal assault would be suicide. Carter stood near the open ramp, staring down at the dark forest below. This wasn't just about taking out a gang anymore. It was about stopping a movement before it could spread. Briggs joined him, adjusting his gear. "You ever think about why guys like Viper turn?" Carter didn't answer immediately. He had asked himself the same question. What made a man go from serving his country to trying to burn it down? Finally, he said, "Some men lose faith. Some just want power. And some never stopped fighting the last war." Briggs nodded slowly. "And which one is Viper?" Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. "All three." The green light flicked on. It was time. The team dropped silently into the forest, moving with the precision of men who had done this 100 times before. The compound was less than a mile ahead, its perimeter guarded by sentries on patrol. Through his night vision scope, Carter could see the outlines of buildings, training facilities, barracks, weapons caches, but something felt off. He pressed his radio. "I count at least 20 guards, but something's missing. No vehicles, no heavy artillery." Briggs' voice crackled back. "You think we got bad intel?" Carter frowned. "No, I think Viper's already gone." Before he could process what that meant, the first shot rang out. A sniper round ripped through the silence, striking one of Carter's men before anyone could react. Then another. The trees erupted with gunfire, tracers slicing through the dark. "Ambush," Briggs shouted, diving for cover. Carter rolled behind a fallen log, his heart pounding. They had walked into another trap. Viper hadn't just left, he had baited them here. Gunfire rained down from the ridge above, cutting off their escape. Carter fired back, taking down one of the attackers, but it wasn't enough. The enemy was too well positioned, too prepared. Then, through the chaos, a voice came over a loudspeaker. "Carter." Carter froze. It was him. Viper's voice was calm, almost amused. "I was hoping you'd come." Carter scanned the ridge, searching for the source. "You're predictable, Captain," Viper continued. "I knew you'd take the bait. Knew you'd, and come running the second I waved a flag in front of you." Carter's teeth clenched. "Where are you?" Viper laughed. "Far away by now. But don't worry, you'll be seeing me again." A new sound filled the night, the low, mechanical whine of drones overhead. Briggs cursed. "They're lighting us up." Explosions rocked the ground as the drones released payloads, sending fire and shrapnel through the trees. The team was outnumbered, outgunned. Carter grabbed his radio. "We're pulling out now." The retreat was brutal. They fought every step of the way, but by the time they reached the extraction point, 3 more men were down. The helicopter lifted off, leaving behind smoke and bodies. Carter sat in silence, watching the burning forest disappear below. Viper had played him. Again. And this time, Carter wasn't sure if he could catch up. Brooks's voice came through the comms, shaky but urgent. "Carter, we just intercepted another transmission." Carter inhaled slowly. "What is it?" Brooks hesitated. "He's going after Arlington." Fire erupted in the darkness as concealed explosives detonated, sending dirt and debris into the air. Gunfire followed, sharp and merciless, cutting through the night. Carter hit the ground as bullets tore past him. The enemy was waiting for them. Briggs rolled into cover, cursing. "They knew we were coming." Carter pressed his radio. "All units fall back to defensive positions. We are compromised." The ridge became a war zone. The enemy had the high ground now, snipers picking off soldiers. As they scrambled for cover, more explosions erupted, shaking the earth beneath them. Carter pulled his rifle up, firing at the nearest muzzle flash. One enemy down, another moved in the shadows. But before Carter could react, a round slammed into his vest, knocking the wind out of him. Briggs dragged him behind a rock. "We need to move." But there was nowhere to move. They were pinned down. Carter's earpiece crackled. "Sir, we're getting torn apart here. We need exfil now." Carter gritted his teeth, scanning the battlefield. His team was scattered, their formation shattered. Smoke and fire filled the air. They had walked straight into a kill zone. Then he saw him. Viper stood near one of the armored trucks, watching the chaos unfold. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, his stance relaxed. Carter locked eyes with him. Viper raised a hand to his temple in a mock salute. Then he turned and disappeared into the convoy. Carter's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about killing them. This was a message. The Iron Reapers had just won their first real victory, and they knew it. Briggs grabbed Carter's arm. "So we have to go!" Carter forced himself to move, his mind racing even as they fell back. They had to cut their losses. They had to survive. The battle was over, and they had lost. Hours later, back at base, Carter sat in silence, his hands resting on the table in front of him. The debriefing had been brutal. They had lost good men. The convoy had vanished. The Iron Reapers had their weapons, and Viper was still out there. Brooks sat across from him, looking just as exhausted. "They planned this," she said quietly. "They knew exactly how we'd move. Someone fed them our intel." Carter exhaled slowly. "A mole." Briggs leaned against the wall, his face dark. "We lost men tonight because of it." Carter stood, his movements slow, deliberate. He felt the weight of the failure pressing down on him, but there was no time to dwell. They had been outplayed. Now they had to strike back. He turned to Brooks. "Find the leak, fast." Then, without another word, he walked out of the room. The war wasn't over, but for the first time the enemy had drawn blood, and Carter wasn't about to let that stand. The night was cold, but Ethan Carter barely felt it. He stood outside the command center, staring into the dark expanse beyond the perimeter lights, his mind racing. The desert ambush had been a disaster. Good men were dead, and the Iron Reapers were stronger than ever. The convoy of stolen weapons was gone, and worse, Viper had been there, watching, orchestrating. He wasn't just leading a gang of outlaws. He was building an army. Inside, the debriefing room was tense. Brooks had spent the last few hours digging through encrypted messages and bank transactions, trying to find the leak that had cost them the battle. Briggs sat in silence, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. The only sound was the occasional click of a keyboard, as one of the intelligence officers tried to make sense of the chaos. Carter turned and stepped back inside, his boots heavy against the tile floor. "Tell me we have something." Brooks shook her head. "We know someone fed them our mission details, but we still don't know who. The encryption they're using is military grade. Whoever's helping them isn't just some disgruntled loner with a laptop. This is professional." Briggs exhaled sharply. "Viper was special forces. He knows how we operate, how we think. Hell, he probably set up half the systems we're using." Carter didn't want to admit it, but Briggs was right. Viper had been one of theirs once, a Marine sniper, trained in the same tactics Carter and his men relied on. He had served with distinction before disappearing off the grid years ago, only to re-emerge leading one of the most dangerous domestic insurgencies the country had ever seen. And now, for the first time, he had beaten them. Brooks tapped the screen, his other tucked into his jacket as if he had all the time in the world. "You're making this difficult," Viper said. "You should have let us burn it down. The people would have turned against your government faster that way." Carter didn't blink. "That's your goal, to turn Americans against America?" Viper smiled. "They're already against it. They just don't realize it yet." Carter exhaled. "Put the gun down." Viper tilted his head. "We both know that's not going to happen." Silence stretched between them. Then, in a movement almost too fast to track, Viper fired. Carter twisted, the bullet slicing past his shoulder as he returned fire. The shot grazed Viper's side, but the man barely reacted, already moving. He dove into the smoke, vanishing like a ghost. Carter cursed, gripping his bleeding shoulder as Briggs' voice came through the comms. "Carter, you good?" Carter took a slow breath, eyes still on the place where Viper had disappeared. "He's gone," he muttered. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burned debris and gunpowder. The firefight in Denver had ended, but the war was far from over. Captain Ethan Carter sat in the back of an armored transport, his shoulder wrapped in bloodied gauze, his mind racing. Viper had escaped. Again. And that meant the Iron Reapers were still a step ahead. Across from him, Sergeant Briggs sat in silence, his expression hard. He was staring at the map on the screen embedded in the transport's side panel. It showed the latest intelligence, the scattered locations where the Reapers had struck, the growing network they had built, and the places they were likely to hit next. Carter exhaled slowly. Where did Viper go? Brooks, seated beside the monitor, tapped a few keys. Satellite imagery picked up multiple vehicles leaving the Denver site. One convoy heading east toward Kansas, another south into Arizona. No way to tell which one he's in. Briggs shook his head. We don't have the manpower to chase both. Carter's fingers curled into a fist. They were fighting an enemy that knew how to move, how to disappear. The Iron Reapers weren't just bikers anymore. They were insurgents, using guerrilla tactics against their own country. And the worst part, it was working. Brooks hesitated before speaking again. We have another problem. She turned the screen toward them, revealing satellite footage of a convoy moving through the Arizona desert. Intel suggests the Reapers intercepted a shipment of stolen military weapons. We're talking high-grade rifles, explosives, possibly even rocket launchers. Briggs let out a low whistle. They're gearing up for something big. Carter didn't hesitate. We move on the Arizona convoy. Now, the order was given. Within the hour, they were airborne. The C-130 cargo plane roared over the desert, the moon casting silver light across the vast emptiness below. Carter stood near the open bay doors, watching the landscape rush past. His shoulder throbbed, but the pain was secondary. All that mattered was stopping Viper before he could use those weapons. Briggs approached, securing his rifle. You thinking this is a trap? Carter didn't look away from the darkness below. Everything about this feels wrong. Yeah, Briggs muttered, but we don't have a choice. The red light inside the plane flickered. 2 minutes to drop. The plan was simple. Intercept the convoy, secure the weapons, and capture any high-value targets. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out operation, but nothing about this war had been simple. The ramp lowered, the desert wind whipping through the aircraft as Carter and his team leapt into the night. They landed in silence, their parachutes disappearing into the darkness. The convoy was close. Dust clouds kicked up in the distance as a line of vehicles moved along the desert road, their headlights cutting through the night. Carter signaled to his team, moving swiftly through the shadows. They set up along the ridge overlooking the road, weapons ready. Then something felt off. Briggs noticed it first. Where are the bikes? Carter narrowed his eyes. The Iron Reapers were bikers. They lived on their machines. But the convoy below wasn't made up of motorcycles. It was SUVs, armored trucks, military vehicles. Realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This isn't a supply run, he murmured. This is an ambush. The first explosion rocked the ridge. His pulse steady even as dread curled in his gut. Where? Denver, Colorado, the analyst said, pulling up a live news feed on the main screen. Public event honoring veterans. The Iron Reapers just hijacked it. The footage was chaotic. Smoke filled the air, crowds screamed, and men in black leather stormed the stage. A Molotov cocktail exploded against the backdrop of an American flag, sending embers flying. Carter felt something cold settle in his chest as he watched a group of elderly veterans scramble to protect the people around them, shielding civilians with their own bodies. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a moment froze on the screen. A man, probably in his 70s, standing between the bikers and a young boy. He turned just as an explosion rocked the stage, throwing both of them into the air. Carter clenched his fists. Brooks exhaled sharply. They just killed a veteran on live TV. Briggs slammed his fist against the table. We have to end this, now. Carter was already moving, grabbing his gear. Get a team ready. We're wheels up in 10 minutes. Brooks hesitated. "Ethan, this is different. They're escalating faster than we can contain them. They're baiting us into an open war." Carter turned to her, his eyes like steel. "Then let's give them one." The transport jet roared through the night, cutting through the sky like a missile locked on its target. The team sat in silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts. The scent of gun oil and sweat mixed in the air, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Carter stood near the cockpit, watching as the lights of Denver came into view. The reports had been coming in non-stop. The bikers had set up barricades, keeping first responders at bay. They had taken control of the event grounds, holding the remaining civilians hostage in a show of power. "ETA 4 minutes, the pilot called back. Carter nodded, turning to his team. "We go in fast, we go in hard. Priority is getting the hostages out and neutralizing the threat. No more playing defense, we take the fight to them." Briggs cracked his knuckles. "Been waiting for that." The jet touched down at a secured airstrip, and within moments they were in armored vehicles, speeding toward the city. The streets were eerily empty as they approached the event grounds. Police had set up a perimeter, but no one had dared breach the biker barricades yet. Carter grabbed his radio. "All teams in position." A chorus of affirmatives crackled back. He exhaled. "Then let's finish this." The first explosion was a diversion. Smoke grenades fired into the center of the event, sending the bikers scrambling. Carter moved through the haze like a shadow, his rifle locked and ready. Gunfire erupted from the barricades, but his men were faster. Suppression rounds took down the first few attackers, the rest scattering as the organized assault tore through their defenses. Carter spotted movement ahead, 2 bikers dragging a woman toward a getaway vehicle. He raised his rifle, took a breath, and fired. The first man dropped instantly, the second barely managing to turn before a second round sent him sprawling. The woman scrambled free, running toward the perimeter where police were waiting. "Briggs'" voice crackled over the comms. "I've got 3 on the north side trying to escape, moving to intercept." Carter turned, scanning the chaos. Most of the bikers were falling back now, realizing too late that they had lost control. Then he saw him. A figure standing on the remnants of the stage, watching the battlefield like a general surveying his troops. Viper. Carter's breath slowed. He had read the files. Viper, former Marine sniper, dishonorably discharged, now the driving force behind the Iron Reapers. Unlike Crusher, this man wasn't just muscle. He was a tactician. A warrior who had turned against his own country, and he was looking directly at Carter. Carter started moving before he even registered his own decision. Viper turned, disappearing into the smoke. Carter followed. He moved quickly, dodging between burning debris, past fallen bikers groaning in pain. The sounds of battle faded behind him as he entered the wreckage of the event grounds, searching through the smoke. Then he heard it. The distinctive click of a hammer being drawn back. "Captain Carter." The voice was calm, controlled. Carter turned slowly, his weapon raised. Viper stood a few yards away, a pistol in one hand. A biker safe house had been identified just outside the city, an abandoned warehouse that had turned into a staging ground for their operations. Carter and his men approached under the cover of darkness, moving with the precision of trained hunters. The bikers inside had no idea they were coming. Through his earpiece, Brooks' voice came in. "You're clear. No civilian activity within the area." Carter gave the signal. The breach was swift. The front door was kicked in, flashbangs rolling inside, shattering the darkness with a violent burst of light and sound. Shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Carter moved like a ghost, his rifle up, scanning targets. A biker lunged from behind a metal crate, a pistol in hand. Carter's response was immediate, a single shot to the shoulder, dropping the man before he could fire. Briggs and the others fanned out, clearing the warehouse room by room. The bikers fought back, but they were outmatched. This wasn't a bar fight. This was war. And they had picked the wrong enemy. Within minutes, the battle was over. The survivors were zip-tied, forced to their knees in the center of the warehouse. Carter stood over them, his expression cold. One of them, a wiry man with tattoos creeping up his neck, spat blood onto the floor. "You don't get it," he muttered. "You can arrest us, kill us. It won't change a damn thing. We're just soldiers. There are more of us." Carter knelt down, leveling his gaze with the man. "You're right. There are more of you," he leaned in. "But there are more of us too." The biker glared at him. "You can't stop this." Carter exhaled, standing up. "We already have." The team secured the warehouse, collecting laptops, phones, hard drives, anything that might lead them further up the chain. This wasn't just about taking down foot soldiers. They needed to find the generals. As the last of the bikers were loaded into transport vehicles, Carter turned to Brooks, who had arrived on site with her analysts. "Did we get anything?" Brooks held up a hard drive, her expression unreadable. "Oh yeah," she murmured. "We got something big." Carter stared at the device, knowing that whatever was on it would be the key to stopping this war before it consumed the country. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, they were no longer just reacting. They were taking the fight to the enemy. The images on the screen flickered, each frame a testament to the violence that had unfolded across the country in the past 48 hours. Captain Ethan Carter stood in the command center, his face unreadable as he watched the aftermath play out. The burned-out war memorial in Texas, the desecrated Naval Museum in California, the chaos in New York. This wasn't just destruction. It was a calculated campaign to rip apart the very fabric of the nation. Behind him, Agent Natalie Brooks paced, her tablet clutched in one hand, her other hand rubbing the tension from her temple. "Casualty reports are still coming in," she said, voice tight. "It's worse than we thought." Carter turned his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the footage. "How bad?" Brooks sighed, tapping a few keys on her screen before reading from the report. 6 civilians dead in Texas. 2 were veterans, an 80-year-old who volunteered at the memorial and a 24-year-old Marine just back from deployment. In New York, a bystander was trampled when the parade turned into a riot. California, 1. Museum security guard killed, 2 injured, multiple fires, property damage in the millions. Carter's jaw tightened. "And the bikers?" Brooks shook her head. "Most of them got away before law enforcement could respond. We picked up a few in each location, but the key players vanished. They're well-funded, well-coordinated, and they know how to disappear." Briggs let out a frustrated breath from his seat at the corner of the room. "They're not just trying to destroy history. They're trying to make people afraid to fight back." Carter nodded slowly. Fear. That was the real weapon here. The destruction was just a means to an end. The Iron Reapers weren't just attacking monuments. They were attacking the idea of America itself, and people were starting to wonder if the country they knew could still stand. The door to the command center swung open, and one of the analysts rushed in, her face pale. "Sir, we have another situation developing." Carter turned. They were fighting a war for the soul of the country, and the enemy was already ahead of them. The night was restless. Even in a city that never truly slept, there was something different in the air. Tension had settled over Washington, D.C., like a fog that refused to lift. Captain Ethan Carter sat at the edge of his cot in the command center, his hands pressed together, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. His mind was a battlefield of its own, replaying every moment of the last 48 hours. The attacks, the interrogations, the information that still didn't add up. Mount Rushmore had been a distraction. Crusher had admitted as much, but the real target remained a mystery. And that meant they were still playing defense. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Briggs stepped inside, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His jaw was tight, his expression grim. "We've got a problem." Carter already knew. "Where?" "Everywhere," Briggs muttered. tossing a tablet onto the cot beside him. The screen lit up with security footage, news reports, and blurry images taken from social media. Carter swiped through the files. The Iron Reapers had moved. Fast! Texas, New York, California, 3 separate locations, all hit at once. The tactics were different, but the message was the same. In Texas, they had torched a war memorial, burning American flags and leaving behind scorched earth. In New York, they had stormed a Veterans Day parade, lighting smoke bombs in the streets, turning what should have been a solemn tribute into a chaotic riot. In California, they had broken into a naval museum, smashing exhibits, setting fire to documents, and live-streaming their destruction to thousands. Carter's grip on the tablet tightened. This isn't just vandalism anymore, he muttered. No, Briggs agreed. This is war. The reports were coming in too fast to process. Footage of civilians running, veterans trying to protect the memorials, police caught between riot control and sheer mayhem. The bikers weren't just criminals, they were insurgents. Brooks stormed into the room, her face pale, her usual controlled demeanor cracking under the weight of bad news. We've confirmed the financials, she said, barely pausing for breath. They're being funded, Carter. Someone's backing them. And it's not just some underground movement. We're talking about serious money. Offshore accounts, dark money trails, connections that go deeper than we ever thought. Carter stood, his pulse a steady drumbeat. Who? Brooks hesitated. We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're organized. This isn't just a network of biker gangs lashing out. This is a full-scale domestic operation. Carter's stomach churned. He had been in war zones, had faced down enemies who wanted nothing more than to see his country burn. But those threats had always been across oceans, in distant deserts and foreign cities. This was home. Briggs exhaled, rubbing his face with both hands. We need to move. We need to hit back. We will, Carter said, but we can't just fight them on the ground. We need to cut them off at the source. Whoever is feeding them money, weapons, strategy, we find them and we end this. Brooks gave a sharp nod. I'll keep tracing the money, but Carter, they're moving faster than we are, and the more chaos they cause, the harder it'll be to stop them. Carter turned back to the footage on the screen, watching as a group of bikers in Texas pulled down a flagpole, the American flag collapsing into flames. He clenched his fists. Then we moved faster. The orders came down within the hour. Full mobilization. The bikers had declared war, and it was time to bring the fight to them. In the dead of night, Carter's team deployed to Texas, landing just outside of Austin, where the latest attack had taken place. The scent of burnt metal and ash still lingered in the air. The war memorial was in ruins, its once proud statue now covered in soot, the marble base cracked from heat. The ground was littered with debris, shredded flags, broken glass, discarded, cans of spray paint. Briggs stepped out of the armored vehicle, scanning the wreckage with a hard glare. This used to be a place for veterans to come and remember, he muttered. Now look at it. Carter's grip on his rifle tightened. We make sure they remember this night for a different reason. The intelligence had been solid. Then flipped the screen around, showing him the carnage. The granite structure dedicated to fallen soldiers had been gutted by fire. The names of the dead, once carved into stone with dignity, had been blackened and defaced. Above the wreckage, the same anarchist insignia that had been sprayed across the Lincoln Memorial was burned into the ground. They're escalating, Brooks muttered. Carter nodded grimly. Because we stopped them in D.C., they're trying to send a message. Yeah, Briggs said from the corner of the room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. And the message is, try and stop us. Carter turned back to Brooks. What about Rushmore? We intercepted the transmission. Do we have confirmation that's their next target? Brooks exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Not yet, but based on the pattern, it fits. It's not just about vandalism anymore. They're trying to tear down the symbols that hold the country together. Carter ran a hand over his face, exhaustion pressing at the edges of his focus. He had seen men like this before. Radicals who believed that destruction was the path to change. They didn't just want to tear down monuments. They wanted to tear down belief, the belief in history, in unity, in a nation that had stood through wars, depressions, and everything in between. He turned to Briggs. "Status on Crusher?" Briggs shook his head. "Still nothing. He's playing the long game. Doesn't think we have the stomach to do what's necessary." Carter scoffed. "He doesn't know me very well." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll crack?" "He will," Carter said without hesitation, "because he's not the top of the chain. He's a soldier, not a general. And soldiers break when they realize their leaders don't give a damn about them." As if on cue, the door to the interrogation room clicked open, and one of Carter's men stepped out. The soldier hesitated for half a second before nodding toward Carter. "He's asking to talk." Briggs snorted. "Took him long enough." Carter exchanged a glance with Brooks before stepping toward the door. "Let's see what he has to say." Inside, Crusher sat in the same position as before. But something had shifted. The defiance in his eyes wasn't as sharp, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders against the discomfort of his restraints. "Changed your mind?" Carter asked, his voice calm, controlled. Crusher let out a humorless chuckle. "Figured you'd be back." Carter pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "We know about Texas," he said, watching for any flicker of recognition in Crusher's face. "We know about the network. The only thing we don't know is where the next attack is coming from." Crusher didn't say anything. Carter leaned forward slightly. "You think you're part of some revolution, but I've seen how these things end. The people funding you, they don't care about your cause. You're a pawn. They'll let you take the fall while they keep their hands clean." Crusher smirked. "And what, you think you're the hero? You're just another cog in the machine, Captain." Carter didn't blink. "Tell me about Rushmore." Crusher tilted his head, considering his options. Finally, he exhaled. "It's already happening." The words hit like a hammer. Carter's fingers tightened against the table. "What do you mean?" Crusher's smirk grew wider. "You think you're in control, but you're already behind. The gears are in motion, Captain. Mount Rushmore isn't a plan, it's a distraction." A cold silence filled the room. Carter stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor. He turned, striding for the door, Brooks and Briggs right behind him. "If Rushmore isn't the real target, then what the hell is?" Briggs demanded. Carter's mind was already racing, piecing it together. Rushmore was a national monument, but it wasn't a functional structure. If the goal was to incite chaos, to cripple the government, to destabilize the country, they needed something bigger. "Brooks, get me a list of high-value targets. Government buildings, infrastructure, anything that would cause mass disruption." Brooks was already moving. "On it." Carter turned to Briggs. "Get a team prepped. We need boots on the ground now." Briggs nodded, sprinting off to rally the unit. Carter clenched his jaw, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. They weren't just fighting a group of radicals anymore. His gaze locking on the images of the captured Reapers sitting in an interrogation room down the hall. "We have their men." Briggs grinned darkly. "You thinking what I think you're thinking." Carter's expression didn't change. "We find out. Who's behind this? We break them from the inside." The room shifted into action. Within minutes, Carter and Briggs stepped into the cold, fluorescent-lit interrogation chamber. The walls were bare, the metal table scratched from years of use. Across from them, Crusher sat slouched in his chair, wrists cuffed to the metal loop on the table, his face still bruised from their last encounter. He looked up as they entered, his lip curling into something between amusement and defiance. "Ah, my favorite government dogs," he drawled, shifting his weight. "Here to play good cop, bad cop?" Briggs didn't smile. "Depends. Which one do you think I am?" Crusher smirked but said nothing. Carter pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, folding his hands on the table. His voice was calm, measured. "We're not here to waste time. You already know how this ends. You either help us, or you..." Disappear into a federal black site for the next 50 years. No parole, no deals, just a concrete cell with no windows until you rot. Crusher laughed, the sound rough and broken. You think I'm scared of a little jail time? You think this ends just because you locked up a few of us? He leaned forward, his cuffs rattling against the table. This is bigger than you, bigger than me. You can't stop what's coming. Carter didn't blink. Try me. For the first time, something flickered in Crusher's eyes. It wasn't fear, but recognition. Recognition that Carter wasn't here to bluff. You don't get it, Crusher muttered, shaking his head. You think this is just a bunch of pissed-off bikers. We're everywhere. Every city, every town. You... Stop us here, we rise somewhere else. Carter leaned forward. Who's funding you? Silence. Crusher's jaw locked. Briggs exhaled sharply, pushing off from the wall. All right, guess we're doing this the hard way. Crusher smirked again, but it was thinner this time. Do your worst. You won't break me. Carter stood, adjusting his sleeves. I don't need to. He nodded toward the one-way mirror. We'll start with the others. One of them will talk. Crusher's smirk wavered. Carter turned to leave, his voice quiet but firm. You think this movement makes you untouchable, but I've hunted men like you before, and the thing about zealots is, they all break the same way. He didn't look back as the door shut behind him. Outside, Brooks was waiting, arms crossed. You think he'll crack? Carter's face was unreadable. They always do. She hesitated. If we're dealing with something bigger, if this is national, we need to be ready for what comes next. Carter met her gaze. We're already behind. We need to catch up before they hit their next target. Brooks glanced at her tablet. We might not have much time. We just got a hit on an intercepted transmission, something about Mount Rushmore. Carter's expression darkened. They're planning something big, Brooks continued, and if we don't stop it, this country won't recognize itself when they're done. Carter inhaled slowly, then nodded. Then we stopped them. The morning air was heavy with the weight of unfinished war. The light filtering through the window of the command center felt artificial, weak against the dark reality taking shape. Captain Ethan Carter stood with his arms folded, his back straight, his mind running through a dozen worst-case scenarios. The pieces were coming together now, but instead of a clear picture, all he saw was a storm on the horizon, a battle that was only just beginning. Across from him, Agent Natalie Brooks paced the room, her tablet clutched in her hands, scrolling through intercepted communications. Her expression was tight, unreadable, but Carter could sense the same tension running through her that he felt in his own bones. We confirmed another attack last night, Brooks said, stopping just long enough to glance at him before returning. Her gaze to the screen. This one in Texas. They burned a memorial in San Antonio, left their symbol behind. Carter already knew what was coming. Iron Reapers, she nodded. Same M.O., different chapter, but same network. It's all connected. Carter's jaw clenched as he let out a slow breath through his nose. How bad? Brooks hesitated. Just as suddenly as it had started, the gunfire ceased. The masked figures began pulling back, retreating toward the remaining SUVs. Carter's instinct screamed at him. This wasn't surrender. This was a regroup. Stay sharp, he ordered, rising. From cover, his weapon still raised. One of the black SUVs peeled away, tires screeching as it disappeared into the night. The other vehicles followed, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Silence settled over the scene, broken only by the crackling of flames from the wrecked convoy vehicle. Carter's grip tightened around his rifle. They weren't here for the Reapers. Briggs exhaled sharply. Then what the hell were they after? Carter turned, staring at the bodies of the fallen attackers. No insignias, no identifying markers. Professionals. His jaw clenched. This was a message. Briggs looked at him, his breath still heavy from the fight. Message from who? Carter didn't answer right away. He looked toward the distant glow of the Lincoln Memorial, still defaced, still marred by the hatred of those who had wanted to destroy its legacy, from the people who think this war is just getting started. And deep down, Carter knew that tonight was only the first strike. The air inside the Tactical Operations Center was thick with tension, the weight of the night's events pressing down on everyone present. Captain Ethan Carter stood near the briefing table, arms crossed, his jaw set tight as he listened to the latest intelligence update. The images on the screen in front of him flickered, grainy security footage of the ambush, close-ups of the masked attackers, satellite views of the convoy route that had turned into a battlefield. Sergeant Briggs sat at the edge of the table, one boot resting against the metal frame, bandaging the graze on his arm from the firefight. His face was set in a deep scowl as he glared at the images. These guys weren't just some random mercs, he muttered, wincing as he tightened the wrap. They had tactics, coordination, and they weren't here to break the Reapers out. They were here for something else. Carter exhaled through his nose, his mind running through the possibilities. They were sending a message, he said finally, his voice low but firm. Not to the Reapers, to us, Brooks, the Homeland Security agent, who had been working alongside them, stepped forward, her laptop balanced in one hand. We ran facial recognition on the bodies we recovered. Nothing in the FBI or local law enforcement databases. No military records either, at least not under these faces. Briggs frowned. So they're ghosts? Not quite. Brooks tapped a key, pulling up a series of financial transactions. We did find something else, untraceable crypto transactions funneling into offshore accounts. Large amounts of money moving in the last few months, payments being made to unknown sources. These attacks aren't just spontaneous, Carter. Someone is financing them. Carter stepped closer, scanning the data. Who? That's the problem. Brooks sighed, rubbing a hand over her temple. Every time we think we're getting close, the trail goes cold. Whoever is behind this, they know how to cover their tracks. Briggs let out a low whistle. This isn't just some pissed-off bikers looking to make a statement. This is an operation. Carter's stomach churned at the thought. He had seen extremist cells before, had fought against them overseas, dismantled networks that operated in the shadows. But this was different. This was home. And whoever was pulling the strings wasn't just targeting infrastructure. They were targeting symbols, the foundation of what America stood for. He straightened, his expression hard. What else? Do we know? Brooks clicked through another set of files. There have been multiple coordinated attacks on patriotic landmarks, not just the Lincoln Memorial. We've confirmed incidents in New York, Reapers spray painting the Statue of Liberty's base before disappearing. In Texas, a veterans' cemetery was set on fire. California, an attack on a naval museum, multiple exhibits destroyed. This isn't random, Carter. They're trying to erase history, one piece at a time, Briggs cursed under his breath. And we just let these bastards slip through our fingers tonight. Carter shook his head. No, we didn't. We have something they don't. He turned back toward the monitor. They weren't facing local cops who would slap them with a fine and send them on their way. This was something different. This was war. Captain Ethan Carter sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his gaze locked on the road ahead. But his mind was elsewhere. The events of the last few hours had set something in motion, something larger than just a single act of defiance. The coordinated attacks across the country weren't isolated incidents. They were part of something larger, something designed to dismantle the very fabric of the nation from the inside. You're quiet, Sergeant Briggs muttered from the driver's seat, glancing at him. Carter didn't respond immediately. He was weighing everything, every action, every possible move. Finally, he exhaled, shifting slightly in his seat. This isn't over, not even close. Briggs gripped the wheel tighter, nodding. Yeah, feels different, doesn't it? Carter gave him a look. Different how? Briggs hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know. Feels more coordinated. Usually these biker gangs are about money, territory, reputation. This is ideological. Carter didn't disagree. He had seen movements like this before. Men who convinced themselves they were warriors fighting for a cause, but in the end, they were just violent criminals, dressing up their destruction in the language of revolution. A sudden crackle came. Over their radio, "Command, this is Bravo Team. We have multiple unidentified vehicles shadowing our convoy. Blacked out SUVs, no plates." Carter's head snapped up, his grip tightening. "How many?" "3 so far. They're keeping their distance, but they're coordinated. No erratic movement, no sudden acceleration." Briggs cursed under his breath. "They're waiting for something." Carter grabbed the radio. "Maintain formation. Do not engage unless they make a move." The convoy pressed on, but the air in the vehicle thickened with tension. Then, without warning, the lead vehicle's radio exploded with urgent static. "Ambush! Contact rear! Multiple hostiles! Incoming fire!" The explosion rocked the back of the convoy, a fireball lighting up the night sky. The force rattled the windshield of Carter's vehicle, and Briggs swerved instinctively, barely keeping control. "Jesus Christ!" Briggs shouted. Carter was already moving. "Full stop! Defensive! Positions! Now!" The convoy screeched to a halt, military personnel spilling from their vehicles, weapons raised. The black SUVs that had been tailing them suddenly surged forward, doors flying open as masked figures leapt out, weapons drawn. Automatic gunfire shattered the night. Carter dove out of the vehicle, his rifle snapping into position as he took cover behind the armored transport. He squeezed off a burst of suppressive fire, forcing the attackers to scatter behind their own cover. Briggs slid in next to him, his face taut with adrenaline. "Who the hell are these guys?" "Not cops, that's for damn sure," Carter growled. The Reapers, still bound in the back of the transport, were screaming now, realizing that their extraction had turned into a bloodbath. More gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off the reinforced metal of the convoy vehicles. One of Carter's men took a hit and went down, clutching his shoulder as another soldier dragged him behind cover. Carter pressed his radio. "All units, return fire. Do not let them breach." "The transport!" Briggs fired off a shot, taking down one of the masked attackers who had tried to flank them. The man crumpled to the ground, his rifle clattering against the pavement. A second later, Carter spotted movement in his periphery, a figure darting toward the transport with a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Suicide charge!" he shouted, raising his rifle. Before the attacker could reach the vehicle, Carter fired. The man staggered mid-step, a sharp cry escaping his lips as he collapsed just feet away from the convoy. The backpack tumbled from his grasp, landing with a sickening metallic clank. Carter's heart slammed in his chest. "Explosives! Move! Get away from the truck!" The team scrambled back just as Briggs rushed forward, grabbed the bag and flung it down the street as hard as he could. It exploded mid-air, sending a shockwave through the night, but away from the convoy. Carter didn't get a chance to react before more gunfire erupted. His men were holding the line, but the attackers were relentless then, his grip firm on the back of a biker's neck as he forced him to his knees. A few of the gang members had been injured in the skirmish, but no fatalities. Carter had made sure of that. This wasn't about slaughter. It was about sending a message. One, that the Reapers would never forget. "All secure, sir," Briggs said, wiping a smear of dirt from his cheek. "What now?" Carter looked past him at the leader of the group, the brute who had called himself Crusher. Even kneeling on the stone, hands bound behind him, the man oozed defiance. His lip was split from their earlier encounter, but the bloodied smirk suggested he wasn't broken yet. Carter stepped forward, boots echoing on the desecrated ground. "You think this is over?" Crusher grunted, shifting slightly. "You think this means we stop?" Carter remained silent. He had dealt with men like this before. Extremists, radicals, men who thought their cause made them invincible. Crusher wasn't just some thug leading a pack of outlaws. He was something more dangerous, a zealot. The man spat blood onto the marble, his eyes locked onto Carter's. "You might have won tonight," he said, voice low and steady. But this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. Briggs let out a sharp breath, shifting his rifle against his chest. Big words for a guy in zip ties. Crusher chuckled, the sound dark and humorless. You don't get it, do you? He lifted his chin toward the defaced statue of Lincoln. The anarchist symbols sprayed across the stone like battle scars. That right. There, that's the first shot. This country's built on its history, and we're going to burn that history to the ground. You can stop us here, but you can't stop the movement. Carter crouched down to Crusher's level, lowering his voice so only the man could hear. I don't need to stop a movement, he said. I just need to stop you. The smile faded from Crusher's face, just for a moment. A flicker of something, doubt maybe, or the realization that he had underestimated the man in front of him. Carter stood, nodding to his men. Pack them up. One by one, the Reapers were hauled to their feet and dragged toward waiting vehicles. Carter turned away from them, his focus shifting to the damage they had done. The paint could be cleaned, the cracks in the stone repaired, but the act itself, the intent, was something deeper. This wasn't just an act of vandalism. This was war. A figure approached from the shadows, moving with the quiet precision of someone who knew how to avoid attention. Agent Natalie Brooks, a Homeland Security liaison, had been monitoring extremist activity for months, and tonight had just confirmed what she had suspected all along. This wasn't random, she said, stopping. Beside Carter, he didn't look at her. I know. Brooks crossed her arms, scanning the wreckage of the memorial. This is bigger than just one gang. We've seen coordinated activity in multiple states, New York, Texas, California. Symbolic targets, all hit in the last 24 hours. Carter exhaled through his nose, the pieces falling into place. It's organized, she nodded, and it's escalating. The weight of the words settled between them. This wasn't just a rogue group of bikers stirring up trouble. This was a systematic attack on the symbols of American identity. And if they didn't move fast, it would only get worse. Brooks hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling through an open case file. We've intercepted chatter suggesting another hit in 72 hours. Location unknown. Carter's jaw clenched. They weren't just reacting to attacks anymore. They were on the defensive, trying to get ahead of something that was spreading. Like wildfire, behind them the sound of vehicle doors slamming shut signaled the end of the operation at the Lincoln Memorial. The Reapers were secured, but the fight was just beginning. Crusher's words echoed in Carter's mind. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. And deep down, Carter knew the bastard was right. The convoy moved through the deserted streets of Washington, D.C., escorted by unmarked military vehicles and police cruisers, their sirens silent, but their presence undeniable. The Iron Reapers sat bound and sullen in the back of the armored transport, their defiance tempered by the weight of their situation. For most of them, the realization had begun to sink in. Captain Ethan Carter knelt behind a stone barricade, his night vision scope trained on the gang. His pulse was steady, his mind calculating. He had seen extremists before, had fought against them on foreign soil. But this was different. This wasn't a terrorist cell on the other side of the world. This was home. He exchanged a quick glance with Sergeant Briggs, his second-in-command, whose knuckles tightened around the grip of his rifle. They're not just vandalizing, Briggs whispered. They're making a statement. Carter's jaw tightened. He had been leading a covert military task force, tracking domestic extremist threats for months, monitoring fringe groups that posed a danger to the nation's stability. The Iron Reapers had always been on their radar, biker outlaws with a history of violence, but this was an escalation. We move now, Carter ordered, the finality in his voice leaving no room for argument. Briggs nodded, signaling the rest of the unit. Silent shapes emerged from the darkness, men trained for moments like this. They weren't here to make arrests. They were here to stop an act of war before it could ignite something bigger. As the first soldier stepped onto the marble steps, the gang's celebration was cut short. Hands where we can see them, drop your weapons. The soldiers fanned out in perfect formation, rifles raised, eyes locked on the men who had seconds before thought themselves untouchable. The bikers froze, most of them. Some stepped back instinctively, realizing too late the difference between a street fight and facing trained military operatives. But Crusher just laughed. Well, Uncle Sam decided to show up after all. He lifted his hammer and let it rest against his shoulder, his gaze locked on Carter. "This is your only warning," Carter said, his tone even, controlled. "Stand down." Crusher rolled his shoulders, shifting his weight ever so slightly. "You boys think you can stop a movement?" His voice dripped with contempt. "You think the government's leash is long enough to choke us all?" Carter's grip on his rifle remained firm, his voice unwavering. "I don't think," he said coldly. "I know." The tension crackled between them, a collision course set in motion. One of the bikers made the first mistake. A hand dipped toward a concealed weapon. A shot rang out. It wasn't a kill shot. Carter's men had been ordered to neutralize, not execute. But the message was clear. Chaos erupted. Some of the gang members bolted, their instincts overriding their cause. Others lunged, refusing to let the night end in their surrender. Fists met Kevlar, boots met rifles. A war that had been brewing in silence had found its first battlefield in the heart of the nation's capital. Crusher roared, lifting his hammer. As he charged straight for Carter. Carter didn't flinch. The hammer never met its mark. With the precision of a soldier trained for war, Carter stepped forward, grabbing Crusher's wrist mid-swing, twisting it with brutal efficiency. The hammer clattered against the marble. "You picked the wrong night," Carter growled, driving a knee into Crusher's gut, sending the brute crashing to the ground. Around them, the battle was already over. The gang members who hadn't fled were subdued, forced onto their knees, their hands bound behind their backs. Some cursed, others spat, but all of them knew the truth. Their night of desecration had become their night of reckoning. As the soldiers secured the scene, Carter took one last look at the defiled monument. The paint, the cracks, it was a wound, but it was not an end. History had withstood worse, and as long as men like him stood against those who sought to destroy it, history would always stand. The thick scent of gasoline and sweat lingered in the air, mixing with the acrid bite of spray paint still fresh on the desecrated marble. The scene at the Lincoln Memorial was chaos. A stark contrast between the historic grandeur of the monument and the bodies sprawled across its steps, wrists zip-tied, mouths spitting curses. The Iron Reapers had spent the night believing they were untouchable, that their message of destruction would echo across the country without resistance. They were wrong. Standing amid the aftermath, Captain Ethan Carter surveyed his team, the glow of the city casting shadows across the tactical gear of his men. Sergeant Briggs was securing the last of the prisoners.